Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Dotson, and I'm your host for Poetry Today. I'm also the founder and program coordinator for Highland Park Poetry. I'm really thrilled to have Jamie Wendt, a young poet. She is the author of Fruit of the Earth, a poetry collection that was published by Main Street Rag Publishing Company in 2018. Actually, it is an award-winning book. It received both the 2019 Illinois Women's Press Association Book Award, as well as the 2019 National Federation of Press Women's Award. So Jamie is a graduate from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, with an MFA in creative writing. That's a very nice pedigree. And then she also received a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education from Drake University. Her poetry has been published in a variety of literary journals and anthologies, including Feminine Rising, Voices of Power and Invisibility, Lilith, Raleigh Review, Minerva Rising, Third Wednesday, and Saranac Review. Her essays and book reviews have been published in Green Mountains Review, The Forward, Literary Mama, and others. Wendt teaches high school English and lives in Chicago with her husband and 2 children. And as an English teacher, you get gold stars. Do you find that you actually? It wasn't one of our prepared questions, but as an English teacher, is your writing practice something that you bring to the classroom at all?
So actually in the fall, I'm going to be teaching creative writing for the first time, which I'm very excited about. It'll be my 10th year teaching high school English, and I've never taught creative writing. So I haven't really brought my own poetry into the class much, although I do at the start of every class, which I've done for years, I'll have a poem a day. Or I'll read a poem a day, which aren't usually my poems, but I'll choose, poets that I enjoy, and I'll pick a book off my shelf for the week and just read a different poem each day, just to start off class. My students will snap afterwards just to kind of get class going. But I'm excited for the creative writing class.
That's great.
I'll kind of be able to share my process and help students revise their own work. So.
That's very exciting. Yeah. Which does lead into what's inspired you as a writer and a poet?
So my inspiration comes mostly from major life experiences that I've had. Writing for me has always been my way to express myself. I've always been an introvert, not too social of a person, so writing has just been my outlet and my way of kind of understanding my own experiences. So in my book, Fruit of the Earth, I write about my wedding experience, marriage, birth of a child for the first time, death of someone close to me. So I think those key moments in my life around life cycle experiences are kind of what inspire a lot of my writing. In addition to what's going on in the world, especially in regards to Jewish Americans. I'm Jewish, and a lot of my poetry is about my Jewish identity. So when something happens in the country or in Israel, that tends to often inspire a poem or something related to what's going on.
Well, certainly I think poetry is a nice way to process a lot of the emotions or feelings, whatever the event is, whether it's something on the global stage or something more personal. It is a way to sort of pinpoint sort of what you're experiencing and cast a new light on it. Yeah. So when you were a guest of Highland Park Poetry at our Coffee Speaks event not too long ago, and read several poems from Fruit of the Earth. So I did get a sense that your writing, that faith is very important in your writing, as well as your family. And did you want to read something right now, just to give our audience a taste of what you're writing about?
Yeah, I do write a lot about faith and family, and I don't know that I would really call my poems religious poems, but they definitely are spiritual, and I tend to pull comparisons through simile and metaphors through Jewish images. I could read one of my poems that relates to family. I have a section of my book is about my grandmother, who I called Alma. She passed away when I was 13, and she was the first person to die who I was close to. So I dedicated a section of my book to her. My daughter has her middle name. Her name was Joan, and so my daughter's middle name is Joan. So this poem is called When Alma Had 4 More Months. We knew she was going to pass away. She had liver disease,
Oh.
so she had like 3 liver transplants, and so this is about her. When Alma had 4 more months. Between us, on her sagging bed, is an old, heavy jewelry box I will inherit along with many names. Alma's lifetime of jewels stare into the widening gap between life and death. Silver and turquoise shine in her shaking palm. Amid rusting silver charms and flowery pins, a golden J, our shared initial, dotted with diamonds, slung on a long chain. I pluck what I want to keep. Her name will belong to my future daughter. The diamonds I do not take decide to return many years later in her questions about what remains. I was 13, and my innocence of death and the passing on of things was like water evaporating from a bedside paper cup. Alma's brittle thumbnails opened the clasp. Her hands, deep red bruises beneath thinning flesh, move toward me, swoop the necklace under my chin, lock it under my ponytail. We admire my image in the small mirror of the jewelry box. Alma prophesizes about all the boys as her pearl studs glimmer in my ears, beg me to dance with them.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
And were you very close to your grandmother?
Yeah, we were really close. I remember spending like most weekends there. Like my parents would go out, and me and my brother would sleep over, at my grandma and grandpa's house. They also had a house in California, where I spent a lot of my childhood spring breaks and winter breaks there with them. So.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I think there's something really powerful about that grandparent relationship, and so what a wonderful blessing that you were to be so close and have that relationship. That's a lovely poem.
Thank you.
My grandmother just passed away in January, so I even as an older adult, I still feel
that connection.
Definitely. I guess I would be really curious about the process that you and your experience of putting your collection Fruit of the Earth together. What was that like?
So I went to the University of Nebraska, Omaha for my MFA, and so part of my graduation project was to put together a collection of poems, a manuscript. So the very early draft of Fruit of the Earth was my thesis, graduating from my MFA program. I reworked it a ton. The whole order has changed, since I graduated. I graduated in 2014, so I spent pretty much the next 4 or 5 years, I guess 4 years, working on reorganizing it, revising a lot of the poems, taking out poems that I felt like didn't fit anymore, adding some based on kind of what was happening in the world and what I was writing. During that time, too, I became a mother. I have 2 kids now that were born, after I graduated from the MFA, and since 2018, or between 2014 and 2018. So being a mother and trying to figure out, how to organize this book and deal with my kids too was like a whole unique process, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
But so it took me, once I figured out the order and moved things around a lot, I ended up submitting the book to some contests through small presses, in addition to small presses that had open reading periods. And after, several dozen submissions and so many rejections, Main Street Rag ended up being the perfect home. They publish a lot of first-time poets, first books, and they do publish other genres, but poetry is their main focus. So they picked up the book and published it, and so I'm really thankful to them. I was able to sit with the editor, Scott Douglas, at the AWP conference. He had a booth selling, so I did an author signing there. So it's been a good experience working with them, and I'm just excited to have it published.
Oh, well, yes. Congratulations.
Yeah,
that is quite an
Mm-hmm.
accomplishment. And it's interesting. I actually don't think I've interviewed anybody where the manuscript that they eventually published was part of their sort of thesis. So I got my Master of Fine Arts is in acting. So I had to write a paper, but it was about performing a role.
Okay.
So I'm curious, did you have to defend your manuscript, or have to provide analysis, or was it literally just, here's my manuscript, thank you so much for the 2 or 3 years of this MFA program?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I didn't have to defend it, but I did have to write an introduction to it, which was about 10 to 15 pages. So I had to write about basically what inspired me, my process of organizing the book, why I started with what I started, kind of what the arc of the book was, what the center of it was, and kind of my thought, like my authorial intent of, putting it together and how it all connected, and the purpose of that. So I did, have an introduction, which isn't in Fruit of the Earth, but that's in the thesis. And then I had to give a lecture on a critical topic. So my critical topic of study during my third semester, there's 4 semesters in the program, I studied Jewish American women poets. So I wrote a critical essay on that that was like 40 pages, long essay. So I had to give a lecture on that as well in order to graduate. But a lot of those writers that I studied in order to write that essay were definitely inspired a lot of the poems in this book, especially Emma Lazarus, who's kind of considered like the first Jewish American woman poet, and Alicia Ostreicher, Maxine Kumin, many other women. So,
well, that's another segue back to your writing in this book. Is there a poem that you would like to share that was actually inspired by one of those writers, or influenced, should we say, by one of those writers?
Yeah, actually, I was going to share too. One of my poems is addressed to Emma Lazarus.
Okay. I think you may have read that one at the.
I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like reading this one out loud because it has several phrases from her poem, The New Colossus, which is her sonnet that's on the Statue of Liberty. So I think readers are familiar with it. It's been used in the news or on protest signs as that poem has been used as like a cry to welcome immigrants into this country. So this poem takes more of a Jewish stance. Emma Lazarus was Jewish, and she, during her time, during the 1880s, 1890s, there was a big influx of Russian Jews coming to the United States because of the pogroms. So she, in a lot of her writing, was about trying to accept them into Jewish American culture and welcoming them here. So this is also about immigration today, though. So this is to Emma Lazarus. Being Jewish at the hook of the 20th century was wretched refuse, homeless. Or were you just referring to their gray, sunken eyes, the spoons they carried to eat the earth, to prosper and forget? Liberty's tough face never smiled above that scrunched sleeve. You know that Miriam and her women sang just as loud, as strong, as tired, as poor as your poetic huddled masses, their bodies the same boxed luggage. But you were wrong about the golden door. Family names were altered, then forgotten, as the colossal door slammed shut the sounds of Yiddish, of names past. Your mother of exiles, more like Rhodes or a Greek goddess than you admit, is everything gold and calf they were commanded not to bow down to, standing idly by, mild-eyed, like God during a pogrom. This patriotic woman does not even pretend to kiss the sky, to offer a penny, her eyes scratched by hail and rain, unknowing, indifferent, like the land.
Wow, okay.
Very political poem.
I'm just curious, obviously, so when did you write that poem? Or was that one that you had written to finish the MFA? Or then? If so, it's rather, I guess we'd say, a prescient, meaning like you had a precursor or a vision of what was coming?
I did. That's a poem that has been revised. So I wrote it initially just kind of imagining what it was like to come here during Emma Lazarus's time. But then as, after Trump's election, and, things have been happening here in 2017, that poem became more of a current poem, I think, using a very old sonnet of hers and kind of making it relevant to today. So.
Oh, definitely. Wow. And then you talked about, so with the Main Street Rag, what was, you enjoyed your relationship with your editor, and you sat at the booth, but what was the process, for you to do the book with them? Did they make many changes to it after they accepted it, or?
They did not, which was great. I had a lot of freedom with this book. They, after they accepted it, they sent me like a PDF version of of what they had seen, and then after that, they sent me the gallery, which and then I could see how the poems were going to look on the page, and I could make corrections. They kind of gave all editorial details to me, or rights to me, so I was able to do that. I also was able to choose the cover. The cover, this is actually a photo that I took in Israel. It's a photo at a Jerusalem market of some seeds. So I've been to Israel like 4 times, and Israel comes up frequently in the book, and my connections to the land and kind of focusing more on the beauty of the land, but also like women's experiences there. So I wanted a photo to just kind of represent something in nature that was taken there. So that was kind of cool that they let me choose the cover. And so I had a lot of freedom in terms of putting it together. And then, it took like, since the time they accepted it until the time it was published, I think was about like 10 or 11 months. Like it was shorter than a year. It was kind of fast. So
that is great.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you hear, oh, my book was accepted, and then 2 years later,
it was published.
Right.
So
Nice.
it's pretty fast. Yeah.
That's great. I guess then was there anything about the whole experience that you would say tips for other poets who are looking to publish? What?
Yeah, that's a good. Tips are good.
Right. What did you learn from the experience that you would say, oh, I was just lucky, or be sure to do this?
Yeah, I think it definitely takes a lot of acceptance with rejection, the whole process. I mean, you get rejected over and over and over, and it just has to be like, oh, another letter that I'm getting in the mail or another email. Like, you can't take it personally. I think if you were to take it personally, it would be a much longer process and a lot more frustration and pain. And I think, a lot of people feel like their book is like their baby, it's very emotional. But I think you just have to be okay with getting rejections. And that goes with submitting poems too. I had about almost 50% of the poems that are published in the book were previously published in journals and magazines. So I think that's another important thing too. People need to, submit their poems out widely. And then once you feel like, a lot of your poems are being accepted somewhere and they fit within a story or within, a book that you're envisioning, then, maybe it's time to start organizing them into a book. But I felt like once I had, a quarter of these poems published and then almost half of them published, I was like, okay, I know this is going somewhere. So just, not to get frustrated and to keep sending your work out, I think is really important. And, don't take the rejections personally. So.
I keep trying. I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but I have a second collection. My first collection, I was lucky to, have it accepted in a contest.
It's like winning the lottery.
It is. And then, but it's the second book that I feel is like I'm having real trouble, and I think I've given up on contests. Now I'm going to start. I'm going to go back and watch all these shows that I've done with interviews and say, hey, who are the best publishers, and just submit directly to them.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about Israel. Were there any poems that you wanted to share that were
sure.
about that experience, or?
Let's see. I'll read one towards the beginning of the book. This is called Tel Aviv Central Bus Station. One of the times that I went to Israel was soon after I graduated from college, and I was just kind of trying to figure out like who I was, what I wanted to do with my life, and so this poem kind of came out of that experience. So this is Tel Aviv Central Bus Station. I show up on time for the tea whistle, for flaky sesame croissants, sweet barekas, nafa, nutty rugula. Windows steam, scents rise. People are running to the army, to work, to visit. I recognize Yerushalayim from my prayer book on an electronic sign. Young female soldiers lean on rifles like canes, laugh and flirt with scruffy American men, popping pink gum, wearing sandals and backpacks. I step up to the bus, place coins into the driver's hand when he speaks to me in Hebrew. I hope the long-haired man sitting next to me will ask where I'm from, will talk to me the short hour ride, and will realize neither of us has a plan when the bus stops, both of us born on the other side of the world. Maybe we turn 23, leave home with rooted lies and hopes, mysteries of Jewish women crying, shaking their fists in the middle of a plaza, kissing broken ground in front of all the children, and we want to understand her struggle and dream. Figure out how to hold 2 different shaking hands at once. So we wander, capture the many shades of home against pink skies. We suck on the land's skin until we give birth in it. We hitchhike across deserts and farmland and rough valleys, collecting the stories of men who count trees, miracles, their children, the 10,000 reasons to stay, walls, rocks, and worse, The 1,000 Reasons to Leave.
Oh, wow.
So.
That's pretty intense. So, and that was from the first trip that you made? Or was that?
That was actually my third trip there, but it was right after college.
Okay, all right.
So,
Maybe that's why I did the trip.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been back one more time since?
Yeah, my husband and I went there for our honeymoon.
Oh, all right.
Which was, it was a great experience. We actually went to Switzerland. So to get to Israel, like Swiss Air was the best way to travel. So we were like, let's go to Switzerland too, like if we're taking Swiss Air. So we went to Switzerland for a few days, and we went to Israel for like 2 weeks, and we went to Jordan as well, to Petra, which was really cool. So yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. I've not been. I guess also I was curious about, you did mention some of the poets like Emma Lazarus that inspired you. Are there other poets that whose work that you say, or if you're feeling stuck, you're like, I think I'll pick up a book by?
Yeah, Alicia Oestreicher is another one of my favorite writers. She's another Jewish woman poet, especially her book, it's called The Book of Life, which is like selected poems about Judaism. She has a section about the Holocaust. She has poems about Jewish rituals, high holidays. That book really helped me like put together a lot of these poems too, and like think about Jewish ritual and like how I can make it accessible to non-Jewish readers, who are reading the book. I don't want the book to be like read just by a Jewish audience, and so trying to think about the American Jewish experience like from a minority standpoint and like how that can be accessible. I think she's really good at making her writing accessible to other readers, and I just really like the comparisons that she has and memories that she writes about. But in addition to her, other poets that I've read recently who I've really enjoyed, Ilya Kaminsky's Deaf Republic, which has been getting a lot of press, is an amazing book where he's creating this whole story based on a war in Ukraine and what happens to when some of the citizens are deaf and kind of don't hear what's going on within the war, and there's a lot of death in the book, but also a lot of love. So I really enjoy that book. Also, Javier Zamora's Unaccompanied has also been, I've read a few times recently. These are not those are both, I guess, newer books. But his book Unaccompanied is about his experience traveling from El Salvador to the United States as a 9-year-old unaccompanied, coming illegally. Okay. So I think these writers are writing about like struggles and kind of their own identities and how they've dealt with kind of some traumatic experiences. So those I think tend to be the most interesting books to me.
Sure. And then now, do you have a future project, or now that this book is out, it's so interesting. And you're telling me you just talked before the show started that you do have some upcoming events in other states now that you're on summer break. But are you thinking about a future book or a second collection, or is that just like, oh, don't bother me now, I'm still recovering? This one.
Yeah, definitely trying to be my own publicist is like a full-time job. So I've enjoyed that for the past year with Fruit of the Earth. But I do have like 2 other projects that I'm working on. I have a whole manuscript that's definitely a rough draft about early motherhood and pregnancy, and again kind of dealing with Jewish rituals and how those fit in. But I have a lot of mother-daughter poems. I have a daughter and a son, and so I have a manuscript that's kind of focusing on those struggles, early motherhood, kind of feeling worn out, pregnancy. That's kind of one manuscript. And then I've also been interviewing my grandpa over the past year, and I'm kind of envisioning a book about our roots in Chicago.
Oh, very interesting.
So my grandpa is from Highland Park. Actually, my family grew up in Highland Park. Okay. My mom did, and her 2 sisters. And so I've been interviewing him. During his childhood, he was in the city, in the north side of Chicago. And so I've been interviewing him just kind of about the Jewish experience in the city, like in the 40s and 50s, and just kind of our family history coming here. His not grandparents, great-grandparents were from Russia and came here in like the 1890s.
Okay.
So I've been trying to find some information about that too, but they spoke Yiddish and Russian, and like he doesn't, and so a lot of stories were lost in translation. Okay. So I've been trying to do some research, and so those are maybe two possible different books. So that's more
like a kind of a memoir-y, or I don't know how you would describe it since you're writing about him. And is he still living?
Right, he is still living, right. So I've been trying to interview him and trying to envision, I'm like, I haven't written any persona poems about his childhood, but that's maybe a possibility, or I'm trying to figure out like how I fit into that, or if it would be even the first person written.
Do you have any poems in this book though that relate to your grandfather, or?
Not as much in this book. This book, there is a section about my grandma, who that was his wife who had passed away, so I focus more on her in here. So that he would be in the second book. Or the third, whatever. We'll see where I go next.
We do have probably enough time for you to read one more poem if you have something that you wanted to share.
Let's see. So I'll read The Sparrows, which is towards the end, which is about my grandmother's death, which, again, a lot of the poems connect back to my Jewish identity. So this poem, I'll just read it. I won't talk about it. Okay. The Sparrows. We prepared the burial at the kitchen table, chalk in our throats with fresh honey. Shrouds without pockets fell from the rabbi's lips, white fabric starched, a bath for the body, scentless soaps. Mom scribbled on paper, illegible curves rushing from her hand, pencil lead rubbed like winter clouds, a blur of something to do instead of cry. A holocaust of words she wrote and wrote what he said, would not stop her dictations when sparrows from a ketubah came to life on the canvas on the wall, flew around the kitchen in circles, hovering over Mom, the great-grandchildren Alma would not know. The rabbi remained focused on his to-dos, as if the birds escaping their frame were normal. Little white shrouds on a kitchen table, nothing out of the ordinary. Like a mother writing the wrong way on lined paper in the middle of the afternoon that was evening gray and cold, anticipating the entrance of Elijah, his saving, the saving from ourselves, our need.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
To share some of the poems and to talk about your process and your next projects. And I wish you the best of luck, especially with your creative writing class in the fall and your upcoming visits. Readings that are. Where did you say, Kansas?
I'm going to St. Louis in next week, and then Omaha, Nebraska in July. So it's fun.
Well, that's great. And so safe travels.
Thank you.
And best verses to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's been wonderful to hear you talk about it, and I like your poetry. It's very. I mean, you say you it's very welcoming, and people can. I don't feel like I have to be Jewish in order to appreciate it. But it definitely shines a light on your experience of faith and beautiful. Capturing of family and that history, and so I really enjoyed it and found it accessible and a good read. So I hope that other people will buy a copy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course we welcome you back to the show anytime, and to our Highland Park Poetry Store or to our upcoming. We have a monthly reading events. So anytime you have something you want to. Hey, my new book is coming. Come.
Thanks so much.
And I'd love to talk to you about your book reviews too. You mentioned in your bio that you write book reviews as well.
Yeah.
So specifically for poetry or for?
Actually, most of my reviews have been about fiction, fiction novels. Which I've done for a variety of publications, but especially for the Jewish Book Council. They'll send me a novel, I'll read it, write a review. It's kind of fun because I get a free book out of it. But
Have you ever thought about writing book reviews for poetry?
I have done a few for poetry. One of my professors at the University of Nebraska, Elizabeth Powell, she wrote a book called Willie Loman's Reckless Daughter, which is a great collection of poetry that explores